Excellent. Well, I see a good number of people on the line and don't want to keep you waiting any longer, so I think we can go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to this webinar in which we'll be providing an overview of the National Governors Association's new state resilience assessment and planning tool. For quick introductions, my name is Dan Loff and I'm the Energy Program Director here at NGA. I'm joined today by my colleague Elise Taylor-Anyakiri, who is a Senior Analyst on our energy team, and Chaz Eby, who is the Deputy Executive Director at the Maryland Emergency Management Agency, or MEMA. So very pleased to have you on the line. Matt, if we can go to the next slide. Give you an overview of what you'll hear about today. We're going to start with just a little bit of context on the topic of resilience and a brief overview of the tool itself. My colleague Elise is then going to take you into a deeper dive into some of the facets of the tool and what you at the state level can expect from its implementation. From there, we've invited Chaz on the line to talk about his experience in Maryland as one of the tool's lead beta testers, and he'll share some of their experiences and what they learned through it. And after that, we will turn it over to you and really welcome any questions that you all have. Importantly, if you do have questions throughout this webinar, please do go ahead and ask them. I think we have everybody muted at the moment, so I'll suggest that if you look, for those of you who are not familiar with Zoom, although I suspect most everybody is at this point, there is a navigation bar at the bottom of your screen, and you'll see both a Q&A and a chat function. So you can use Q&A to submit questions to those of us on the panel, or chat if you want to submit questions to the full group, to anybody individually, or if you want to share any other resources as we go through the presentation. So with that, we'll go to the next slide, and I'll provide a bit of an overview for why we're here and why we're talking about this, this topic. And I think this map really says quite a bit. This is from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and it's a map of all of the billion-dollar weather and climate disasters that occurred in calendar year 2019. You'll see here that there were 14 of them. They're not just wildfires, they're not just hurricanes, but they come in many different forms and can take place across the country. And moving on to the next slide, here in 2020, so not even a year later, this data is through, I believe, October 7th. So essentially through January 2020, so the first 3 quarters of the year, we are already up to 16 such disasters. And I suspect we'll see that number increase, which will actually be a record. And I don't think that that increasing trend is a one-off. Going to the next slide, looking at all the data that NOAA has captured. Since they began tracking the data in 1980, you'll see at least what appears to be a fairly significant trend upwards of these types of events, with the last 5 years each having 14 or more. So we view that as significant. And we've heard, similarly from the states as well. And for that reason, we've really been shifting our support to the states to not only address emergency response and preparedness from that standpoint, which we very much continue to support through our Homeland Security team, but also pre-disaster mitigation and resilience. So exploring what we can put in place now in essentially blue sky days to avoid the worst impacts of a disaster, human or natural, in the future, and to ideally help states respond and recover more quickly. So moving on to the next slide, we've actually been tracking trends at the state level in which governors are increasingly focused on this topic. So currently, I think as of this webinar, there are 11 governors that I'm aware of, or 11 states with either chief resilience officers or dedicated resilience offices that have authority within their state to work across state and industry silos to essentially facilitate broader and cross-cutting resilience planning and investments at the state level. And I'm aware of maybe a half a dozen states that are actively looking into establishing such roles. So we've seen more come online this year. I believe South Carolina was the latest, and many more underway. And with that focus, we've also seen an increase in state resilience planning efforts, whether these are cross-cutting working groups addressing some of the critical needs of their states, or the development of in-depth written resilience plans to help coordinate resilience efforts and prioritize investments. Of note, I know Virginia and North Carolina both released plans within the last several months, and I know others have a number of others have released states or have released these plans over the last several years with more in the works. So with that in mind, NGA has been working with a cohort of states and a number of external partners to develop what we call the State Resilience Assessment and Planning Tool, or SRAP tool for short, as you'll hear us refer to it. It's a tool based on input from a variety of entities, as you see here, both from the private sector, from the research community, the federal government, and state government. It builds on some of the other frameworks that exist, such as the United Nations Essentials and other assessments focused on local government entities in the private sector. But to our knowledge, it's really one of the first comprehensive assessments really focused at the state level. As you'll hear, it is a tool that does produce a qualitative score from 1 to 100 to measure your state's resilience, but more importantly, it has a quantitative score, but also provides qualitative feedback through work with NGA on what you at the state level can do to really address some of the challenges at your state and help to advance resilience. So it is a tool that's intended, there's no cost, of course, for states to complete it. It's intended to be for the state's benefit. So we're not looking to benchmark or make any of these results public, but are hopeful that as states increasingly look to address resilience before an event occurs and look to implement pre-disaster mitigation, or as you are exploring what to apply for, say, for funding mechanisms like BRIC, we're hopeful that this can be a helpful resource for you. So with that, I am going to turn over the mic, so to speak, to Elise Taylor-Anyakiri on the team, who is going to provide a much more in-depth overview of the tool. So Elise, take it away.
Thanks, Dan. So we're going to actually break into the tool now. So the SRAP tool is divided into 5 main sections. We've kind of looked through other people's tools and done an assessment to be what are the most important things that states need to focus on when trying to assess their resilience. And so that those sections are establishing effective governance, evaluating and mitigating risk, assessing vulnerabilities to critical infrastructure, mitigating economic consequences and financing resilience, and lastly, strengthening community ties. I'm going to walk through each of these sections, and then we'll actually give you a preview of the tool itself, and then kind of talk about some of the best strategies for implementation. So the first section is establishing effective governance. We really want to think, what can you actually do within your state? You need to have a really good understanding of roles and responsibilities, as well as having an appropriate documentation of such roles and responsibilities so that you can practice upon your plans. We find that to be a really critical component. Like when a disaster happens, knowing who's supposed to be doing what, having that clearly articulated so that even if there's a change in people or administration, it's easier for people to follow up on and know what they need to be doing. It's also important to do joint planning and identification. So working with other entities in your state and private entities as well to make sure you're trying to encompass everyone as possible. And there's a special kind of focus in on communication. So that the communication with federal partners, state, local, and a variety of people is a really important component when you're thinking about effective governance. The second section focuses on evaluating and mitigating risk. So in addition to knowing roles and responsibilities, it's important to complete risk assessments and understand where your state stands and where your weaknesses and vulnerabilities are. So when you're completing these risk assessments, it's important to do them within your state, but also to coordinate with local partners. The state only owns so many assets and resources, but a lot of resilience is also going to force you to engage the private sector, who own a lot of the other critical infrastructure assets. And that's on the evaluating and understanding your risk. That's completing something like FEMA SIRA, the Threat and Information Resilience Assessment, is one that we highly recommend, but there are also others. And in terms of mitigating risk, there are several things that states should be doing to make sure that you are reducing your risk profile. So that's making sure your building codes are up to date and that those are being enforced at the proper level, whether that be at the state level or the municipal level, having an understanding of what's happening there and making sure the proper things are happening. It's implementing grid hardening, so working with your critical infrastructure owners and operators and making sure they have the things they need to harden the grid when in areas that are weak, considering microgrids for very important assets or assets that are most vulnerable, and then also addressing cybersecurity. So a lot of the disasters you think about are natural disasters, but also the disasters coming around from like cybersecurity. And there's also a key in on the section about unity of messaging. There's been a big rise in disinformation, and so important that you as a state and working with your federal partners are having an effective strategy to message out to the public and to message out to private infrastructure owners to make sure that everyone understands what's happening. The third section specifically focuses in on addressing vulnerabilities to critical infrastructure. So when we talk about critical infrastructure, we're really focusing on energy and water infrastructure because those are so important to support other lifeline sectors, whether that be healthcare or emergency response. And one thing that we really want to draw in here is a lot of critical infrastructure in states isn't actually owned by states. This section is really key to thinking about how do we partner with our private industry or municipally owned critical infrastructure and make sure that we're all on the same page and kind of on the same agenda in terms of improving resilience in your state. This includes working with them, whether that be through just a relationship-based or actually using the regulatory structure, whichever is most appropriate in your state, but to make sure those lines of communication are open and being used, and then also having a really clear understanding of roles and responsibilities, again, about who's doing what, and then figuring out what do critical infrastructure owners need from you. If there's a lack of funding, how can you address that? How can you get the right things coordinated? We also draw connection to connecting with your borderline states, your adjoining states. Like sometimes if there's a power incident in the state next to you, how does that affect your state? Also, when there's an emergency, the state next to you, how does that affect things in your state? So making sure that you're also assessing not just the critical infrastructure in your state, but things that might also have an impact in your state, like being aware of what those impacts could be and making proper preparations. Section 4 is on mitigating economic consequences and financing resilience. Kind of doesn't seem this pandemic, states really have to be prepared to handle anything that comes at them, and that starts with understanding your state's financial position and where you are currently and what your financial needs are, and then also planning beforehand and putting aside the appropriate amount of dollars to finance resilience. So if something happens, you have the right amount of money to, or as best as you can, have the right amount of money set aside to try and help finance resilience up front, but also recover from disasters. So this section kind of goes through a lot of questions and thinking about how is your financial structure of your state set up, and what are some things that you might need to do to be better prepared to respond to emergencies. This could include, this also talks about continuity of operations plans. It also kind of digs into that as well. And most importantly, understanding how to access federal disaster relief. Large billion-dollar disasters often lead you to working with FEMA to try to address and remedy situations. So understanding how do I address that, how do I best access that money, and what other federal dollars are available to you. And then lastly, we have strengthening community ties. Often when we have a disaster, it's not just the state that's responding. There's also lots of community organizations and volunteer networks that also respond. And knowing that in advance, it's smart to try and plan with those organizations and be on the same page. So that's bringing them in and establishing, solid communications, but also including them in your planning and practicing efforts. So as you're making those mitigation plans, as you're doing your threat assessments, having these people have a seat at the table so they also are fully aware and can kind of contribute their own knowledge. So a good example of one of these organizations might be in Louisiana. They have something known as the quote-unquote Cajun Navy. And they're, at this point, a very well-known group, and having them at the table can really assist local law enforcement as they respond to emergencies. So we really encourage that. Outside of volunteer organizations and community groups, we also encourage the state to work with your own constituents. So that's conducting disaster training and education for residents. You know, as things happen, like ensuring that they know how to respond. It's having a plan on where do you go if there's an evacuation, how does that work, and what kind of things are available to you. And we extremely encourage also making sure you're thinking about barriers to preparedness or risk for at-risk populations. Also another really critical category, whether that be low-income communities or dealing with incarcerated populations, so kind of thinking through every at-risk group and how are you best addressing them as a state. And now I'm going to go over to the tool to give you an actual preview. Can everybody see the Excel document? Nope. Okay, 1 second. Can you see the Excel document now? Good, okay. This is an overview of what the tool looks like. It is across multiple tabs. So the first few tabs kind of give you some of the same overview we're giving you here, and breakdown of the motivation, what the goals are, the actual instructions for the tool as you pass it around to people that haven't had a chance to interact with us, kind of walks you through how the tool is used and how you complete the assessment. We've included a state contact sheet, which I'll kind of give you some more details on later. But this is it. If you give the tool out to other people in your state, this is where you can kind of keep up with that and track what you need to track. And then a glossary of terms as people use the tool. If you have a question about what something means, if we use shorthand, then you kind of have an idea of what that means. So this is the first section, establishing effective governance. The sections are broken down into questions that kind of go row by row. And as you answer each question, there are 5 preparedness levels, from most prepared to minimally prepared, each one with a different response. You can kind of decide which is most appropriate for your state and select that here. And we'll use that to calculate your score. But outside of the quantitative response, it's also really important to think about the qualitative response. So if you roll over to these 2 columns here, they detail, you know, why did you select this response and why do you think this is the most appropriate response to your state? There's also what steps do you think your state can do to try and improve your selection. We think these important sections are really important to fill out and to really encourage people in your state to really think these through, because while the quantitative result is really helpful, it's really what's most helpful is the qualitative, understanding how different people in your state are responding to this and why they think the things that why they chose the selections they chose, that you guys can kind of come together as a state and really understand what's going on. You'll also notice as we kind of go through these questions, some questions you'll see they have sub-questions. So sometimes it was important to call out certain entities. So this question is focused on communication within your state. You have a lot of people that you need to communicate with. You'll see it's broken down by appropriate groups, to communicating with local and municipal officials. If there are tribal nations in your state, communicating with tribes, and as well as federal officials. So you'll see this kind of across the tool when appropriate, either breaking out certain actors or groups or certain critical infrastructure sectors as well. Just kind of give you an idea of how that works. And then when you have a sub-question, it's kind of summed up and tabulated when we assess the score. So this was establishing effective governance, evaluating and mitigating risk, and you see the other sections kind of as you go along. I'm going to go back to the presentation. Okay. So when it comes to implementation, we really encourage you, it's hard for just the governor's office to really know what's going on across the state. We really encourage you to distribute and assign portions of the tool to the relevant offices and agencies and subject matter experts, to kind of leading to that contact sheet that I was showing you earlier. As you assign it, you know, if you send the tool out, you can assign or list that person's name and contact information and what sections you really want them to answer or key in on, where they have the most appropriate expertise. So that when you come back together, you can kind of get a really whole assessment, a thorough assessment of what's happening in your entire state. It's important to really specify any objectives or areas of focus of those entities. They understand, you know, what you're looking for from them. Once this tool has been distributed and people have returned their responses, we encourage the governor's office, the assigned lead, to really combine all those responses and kind of sift through and understand where you are. And then on completion, we really encourage, we found it to be really beneficial to host a meeting with all participating offices and agencies and have a really good discussion about why people selected the answer they have. You'll often find that sometimes people have a different view or perspective and trying to understand where those differences are and what your state might need to do to try and have a better response. It also helps identify solutions. When you get all the right people at the table, it's easier to think of solutions to the challenges that have been presented. At the conclusion of the tool, if you send the tool, send your responses back to NGA, we can calculate your score, and then we will provide dedicated follow-up. So we calculate your resilience score based on the tool, the Excel document that I just showed you, and then we will follow up in a couple of weeks to kind of share the results, kind of explore potential solutions from what we've seen and we've seen other states do, and then offer any other additional technical assistance as needed. And that's kind of an idea of how the tool works. And now I'm going to hand it over to Chad, and he is going to tell you about Maryland's experience. So Maryland was one of the first states that we actually piloted the tool with, and he's going to give you an overview of how that went for the state of Maryland.
Thanks very much, Elise. And before I even get started, I have to say to Dan, regarding your billion-dollar disasters chart, as my colleague emergency managers on the line would probably agree with me when I say, not only is it going up, but you're going to have to come up with a couple other colors for the types of disasters that we could see in the future. Of course, the COVID-19 response is the proof right there. We're expecting in Maryland alone that under the Stafford Act, it'll likely be over $1 billion. And I know that we can think of all the different threats that are affecting us right now. But I do want to thank the NGA for the opportunity to talk about our experience with the SRAP tool. In Maryland, resilience is not just a buzzword. It's also a focus and a strategic focus from everyone from our governor on down. Governor Hogan is actually the past chair of the National Governors Association, where his priority for his year from 2019 into 2020 was resilient infrastructure. And going on at that same time, the executive director of MEMA, so my boss, Director Strickland, Russ Strickland, is the current co-chair of the National Emergency Management Association's Resilience Committee. So we're big believers, as I'm sure many of you on the line are as well. And the SRAP tool really helped us get a jump start in some of the resilience initiatives that we've taken over the past couple of years. And so today, I'm just going to take a couple minutes and talk about three things. First, how we used the SRAP tool itself. Second, the Maryland Resilience Retreat, which was something we did in conjunction with the NGA following our use of the tool. And the third are the current initiatives that through the tool were identified and then actually executed and our continued work in resilience. So first, the tool itself. And like many planning and evaluation projects, the tool itself was useful, but a lot of the utility that we found really was in the interagency collaboration and the use of the tool, not by the emergency management agency, MEMA, but by our sister state agencies that don't think about risk reduction and resilience on a daily basis. So one thing I would encourage anyone who does use the SRAP tool to do is to get top-down buy-in from your governor's office or similar, and ensure that all of the sister state agencies in your state use the tool and actually provide input in the areas most relevant to them. Of course, the Emergency Management Agency is a natural fit to lead it as a multi-agency coordination body. We were also assisted with our Office of Homeland Security, our planning department, and our energy administration. But MEMA took the lead in gathering input from other agencies, and our governor's office really enhanced that by making it a requirement for those agencies to participate. And so the tool itself did identify some areas that we found we needed to work on in Maryland. And so to kickstart that process, we held a one-day resilience retreat. It was a cabinet level, full day, secretary level experience for Maryland leadership. It started with a definition of resilience and some academic presentations, but the majority of the day, and something I would encourage any states who are able to do this to do, is actually getting the state cabinet leaders into small groups to actually go through the problems that we identified in the SRAP tool and have discussions on interdependencies that the tool identifies, and also brainstorm projects at a very senior level, at a high level, that could be completed in future years and out years after using the tool by the agencies that participated. It was great. Of course, it ends up being very high level at a policy level when you use a cabinet position, but what it did was it gave us these ideas that could be a starting snowball that we could roll down the hill and gather steam. And in order to actually complete projects, we knew we'd have to continue this on at a sub-cabinet level. And so the third thing I want to talk about today is our disaster risk reduction working group, which was a direct identification from the SRAP tool and the resilience retreat that we needed a standing body in Maryland at a more operator level with all of these state agencies to identify these key areas around the state that we could work on together, and then submit real projects to various funding sources or create policies as a state that would help increase resilience and reduce risk. And so we now have a standing body, again, called the Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group in Maryland. It's comprised of key state agencies that can help identify and develop projects. They've met throughout 2019. Of course, we've had a couple hiccups with 2020 and our focus on COVID, but we're already gearing up for 2021 to reinvigorate this group and identify projects. However, even for the 2020 cycle, that group did develop some projects that we will be submitting to the FEMA Building and Resilience and Infrastructure and Communities program, the BRIC program, for funding. And we also, through that group and through the SRAP tool, actually drafted and successfully ushered in legislation last year, which is now law in Maryland as of October 1st, 2020, which actually requires during any incident that involves multiple state agencies that be coordinated through the Maryland Emergency Management Agency. That was a standing practice, just something we did, but now it's actually law. And so again, that's a policy because of the SRAP tool that helped us push that forward, along with our governor's buy-in for resilience. So we have both projects and policies. So I know there will be time for questions, but I think overall my point is that the SRAP tool, like many tools, the utility is in getting top-down buy-in, working with agencies outside of emergency management and security and energy resilience for their input, and then actually following through with those projects at a more operator level and with a standing group or something similar, while you identify the federal and other grant opportunities to actually make them happen. So I do want to thank the NGA. They did provide technical assistance throughout the process. So, by using the tool, you're also buying into all of the resources the NGA has to offer throughout the whole time. And that really helps kickstart a project when you have a background team helping out. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chaz. Well, first of all, really appreciate those remarks and just the level of detail you were able to get into in your work with the tool and after. We have had a few questions come in. So before moving on to the next part of the presentation, I want to make sure we get to those. One question that came in was about who at the state level has received the tool so far. So we have sent the link out to to staff in the governor's office at the policy level, in particular Homeland Security advisors and energy policy advisors, among others. That said, it of course hasn't gone to everybody. So there is a link that Matt Rogatsky on the team posted at the top of the chat that anybody can access and share, or you can reach out to us if you have any other questions, or if you'd like us to send the tool to you or to anybody else in particular. Chaz, I also see one question that came in for you, just to clarify something that you had talked about. So could you elaborate on who is part of the risk reduction working group in Maryland?
Yes, I can. That's a good question. It's a large group, so it includes, of course, MEMA's the facilitator, right? So we aren't, it isn't our group. It's a state group of a number of state agencies. So it includes, of course, MEMA, our Office of Homeland Security, our Department of Natural Resources, Department of the Environment, Department of Transportation, Planning, Energy Administration, Public Health, State Police, Commerce, and I'm likely missing a couple off the top of my head, but I can include that if there's follow-up from this meeting to the NGA with a group listing. It's about a dozen principal state agency departments. Again, the thought being that we know state agencies are working on projects around the state that could be better worked on as a group. So if you're a natural resources agency, you may have a project in the works to restore wetlands in southeast Maryland or some area of the state, while at the same time the Department of Transportation may have a project on a state highway where they're increasing storm drainage and a highway that runs in that same area. And so the risk reduction working group, the real point was to get those state agencies together, identify projects that could be better leveraged as a group, and then in areas where we're all seeing problems, work together to actually apply for projects for funding through FEMA or another federal source to actually solve those problems.
Excellent, thank you. And are there any, before we move on, are there any other immediate questions for Chaz?
There's just one more question. Someone was asking, how critical is it for a state to agree on a definition of resilience to use the tool? I don't know if that's directed at Chaz, Leah, or S. I think you have to agree, but I think using the tool will kind of help you coalesce on where your weaknesses are and then respond accordingly. So I don't necessarily think that everybody has to agree. I think it is helpful to everybody be marching in the same direction. I think the tool can still be useful in terms of identifying where your weak points are and what you might need to do to shore up yourself. I don't know if Dan or Chaz wanted to answer as well.
I'll provide my thoughts,
ahead.
and yeah, they might. Man, I don't know if this is a terrible thing to say, but I don't think it's that important to agree on an exact definition. I think it's important to start the conversation and figure out when you talk with your colleagues at other agencies or other disciplines, where are the common problems that every discipline is seeing, and then identify how you can work on a solution to that problem together. So, academically, I think you can talk about what the word resilience means and if it is important to have a single definition. But I think the conversation starter in our case was the most important piece.
Fantastic. And I was just going to say something similar. I think I don't know that it's critical to have an agreed upon definition on the outset. I will say I think what could be helpful is for the team to agree on parameters for tool implementation at the outset. If there are certain things that you want to test, but those parameters would be very specific to the state. So we don't attempt to define those at the outset for all states, knowing that what may be needed in Nevada or what you may need to look at in Nevada could be very different from, say, Wisconsin or Maryland or Florida or another state. But in terms of the actual definition of resilience, as Chaz mentioned, I think that a conversation around what resilience means for the state and what's important could actually help to identify both those areas of commonality or challenges in other corners of the state or in other agencies that you as your state's lead on the topic may not be aware of. And then there is a question about NGA's technical assistance that just came through, what it is and what we can do. It looks like, Chaz, the question is directed at you, actually, asking about what technical assistance you received from NGA. So happy to have you answer it, and I can also supplement for what we can do for states moving forward.
Okay, because otherwise they'll just think you gave special treatment to Maryland, which I'm sure that's not the case. Well, for one, they really brought the retreat. They helped bring the retreat to us and devise an agenda along with our staff and a report following it. But NGA created the tool, and when we did have questions as we executed the tool, they stepped right in to assist us. And then really following it as well, they helped us devise a game plan for our risk reduction working group. And while we do a lot of this, we've pretty much picked up the ball from there. I think the initial technical assistance was quite helpful.
Excellent, and thank you for that. And moving forward, for NGA's technical assistance, essentially we're here as a resource for you. You don't need to work directly with us to implement the tool. It's available for download. Anybody can download it. Instructions are on our website too, so if you want to go it on your own, so to speak, you're welcome to, but we are here, we are available, of course, as a resource to the states. What we would recommend is if you are interested in either learning more about the tool or understanding how the tool can be valuable, or if you know that this is something that you want to implement at your state, please do reach out to us, either to Elise and I directly, or we do have a more generic resilience@nga.org website that you'll see in a couple of slides. And we're happy to set up just an initial conversation with you to start to talk about what your needs might be, how you might be able to tailor the tool to those needs. And then from there, we can help to identify who should participate in it, answer any other questions that you do have about implementation and troubleshoot in real time. And then, of course, after you complete the tool and send it back to us for scoring, part of that effort is going to be, again, that qualitative resource gathering. So it's not just a score that in and of itself may only be so useful, but we'll work with you to identify what some of the priority areas for improvement may be. Where are there some resources, whether they are NGA resources from other state association colleagues or other experts throughout the field. We, of course, don't have all the answers, but can hopefully help you identify who does. So really, the technical assistance is going to potentially vary depending on the needs of the state, but it's not completely structured or regimented, because we wanted to be able to give you all the flexibility to implement it as you see fit. So again, I would encourage for your state, give one of us a call, send us an email, and we can have that conversation with you. And moving on to, not seeing any other questions come through, moving on to our final slide. Did want to show, adding to Chaz's presentation, both here you'll see some of the findings from both Maryland and other states that beta tested the tool. So again, Maryland was part of a cohort with Idaho and Oregon. You'll see it's really a range of challenges and issues that were identified and discussed. Everything from addressing threats to liquid fuel supplies in earthquake-prone regions to addressing local energy resilience efforts, working with, coordinating with industry to identify solutions. Of course, funding and financing are always challenging. And then, of course, determining how best to implement new plans or exercise those plans. Continuity of government was also a major conversation in a number of the states, particularly around a critical energy outage. But really, again, what's I think important to note here is less so on the specific findings, because again, those will be specific to your state. But I think what's more important to note is that each of the states that we've worked with so far has taken a very unique approach. You heard about Maryland's, which was quite effective. In the other states, they engaged some cabinet level officials, also many agency level experts, along with local government, industry, and others to complete the tool. Some divided the tool up into sections, sent it out, and combined everything on the back end. I believe one of the states actually set up a half-day meeting or a couple-hour meeting and completed the tool as a team real time so that they could use the questions as jumping off points for conversation. So point being, there is some flexibility which we can help you sort through. So with that, I am going to move on to the next slide here. So you'll see, again, that resilience@nga.org, along with the link to access the tool, which you'll be able to get when you actually have a copy of these slides, or you can look in the chat box where we've included it. But I'm going to pause here since we have a couple of minutes left to open the line back up for any other questions, either for Elise and I, for Chaz, or for the three of us. So I'll pause for a minute. Again, you can use the chat function or the Q&A function. Seeing none at the moment, I will also encourage you to follow up with Elise, myself, or this website. I think Elise just shared her email address as well through the chat. If you have any other questions, we're happy to set up those conversations and talk with you. Wanted to thank you all for taking the time today. Very much wanted to thank DOE. I should have mentioned it earlier, but they have supported the development and implementation of this tool, the Office of Electricity and the Cybersecurity Office. And then Chaz, thank you as well for coming on and sharing your experiences with this group. So thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.